Hello, everyone. This is Jed Distler, and I welcome you to the Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. I've been really touched and honored that so many of you have been writing to me with your comments and feedback when I post episodes, which one can download, stream, or subscribe to on most major podcast platforms, from Apple and Spotify to YouTube. Actually, the comments I've received largely have come from YouTube viewers and subscribers. I had a request from several people to do a survey of recorded cycles devoted to the Chopin Nocturnes. And I honestly hadn't thought about doing that just now because we recently had an episode where I discussed various recorded cycles devoted to the Chopin etudes. And I didn't want to tilt the scales too much toward Chopin. I'm trying to cover a lot of bases on this podcast, if you know what I mean. However, you can't deny that Chopin is the center of the piano world's universe, pretty much. And I wish I could remember exactly that quote of Arthur Rubinstein. He said something to the effect of, "When the first notes of Chopin sound through the concert hall, there is a happy sigh of recognition. The piano sounds more natural. The public listens more naturally." The quote was something like that. I don't know. Maybe I'm putting words into Rubinstein's mouth. If you know that exact quote, please let me know in your comments. Anyway, I'm very happy to honor your request to talk about the Chopin Nocturnes. I'm not going to talk about every Chopin Nocturne cycle ever made. That would be totally insane. Well, maybe it wouldn't be insane for a piano maven like you and I, but I think it might be better if we limit this discussion to a handful. Let's say I'm going to take 6 different Chopin Nocturne cycles. I've chosen the ones I'm going to talk about on account of their diversity in playing style, their diversity of interpretive conceptions, and also that they represent several generations of pianists. By the way, I'm going to save Arthur Rubinstein's 3 Chopin Nocturne cycles for a separate episode, simply because I've already devoted an episode to Rubinstein's 3 Chopin Mazurka cycles, and I think it's only fair to make room for some other pianists. I'd like to begin with one of the more interesting Chopin Nocturne cycles from the mono LP era. This one features the Polish pianist Jan Smeterlin. It was recorded for Philips in 1954, and 40 years later, it came out on CD as part of the Philips short-lived The Early Years reissue series. Its most recent compact disc incarnation comes from Australian Eloquence, thanks to that label's visionary reissue producer Cyrus Mayer-Homji, and he has resurrected so many valuable recordings languishing in the vaults. But I've kept the Early Years reissue because it has excellent booklet notes by James Methuen Campbell, who talks about how Smeterlin tended to go his own way with Chopin's markings, often reversing the dynamics and alternating articulations. In general, Smeterlin takes fast tempos. He's not an expansive or dreamy nocturne player by any means. And sometimes he can be a little too brisk for comfort, such as in the A-flat Nocturne, Opus 32, number 2, where the middle section just whizzes by on a motorcycle, in this recording at least. And also, the pianist just speeds through the E minor, Opus 72, number 1 Nocturne's climaxes. It's a little bit disconcerting to my ears. But I can forgive these occasional transgressions because the genius behind Smeterlin's Nocturnes, and I use the word genius very carefully here, but I really mean it, is in how he projects melodies. It's really kind of remarkable how he does this. Now, I'm going to quote from my review of this recording for ClassicsToday.com because I really can't describe Smeterlin's melodic projection any better than this. I wrote that phrases transpire in conversational fashion, oblivious to bar lines, with nearly every accent and dynamic inflection falling in an unexpected yet logical place. Each selection bears this characteristic out. Memorable examples include Opus 15 No. 3's magically voiced central chorale-like episode, the freedom from sentimentality he brings to the Opus 9 No. 2 E-flat Nocturne, Opus 37 No. 2's delicately honed double notes, and the rarefied textural layering he achieves in Opus 48 No. 2's final pages. Somehow, quoting from my review, as I'm speaking those words, I think they look better on page than they sound spoken out loud. Anyway, the point is that I come back to Jan Smeterlin's Chopin Nocturnes pretty often, and every time I listen, I always find something new to savor. Now, the sonics are a little bit boxy, even by 1954 mono standards, but Smeterlin's tonal shadings definitely come across. However, if you want to have similar conceptions, but in the hands of a more modern-day Chopin stylist and in up-to-date digital engineering, I would recommend that you check out Nelson Freire's Chopin Nocturne Cycle on Decca. Next, I want to talk about a Chopin Nocturne Cycle that has always seemed to fall between the cracks. It was released in 1960, I think, originally on the EMI label, and it features the pianist Moura Lympany. My late friend Harris Goldsmith, who was a great critic and an excellent pianist, reviewed this cycle when it first came out. He reviewed it for High Fidelity magazine, and he really did not care for it. I've always admired the cycle. Like Jan Smeterlin, Moura Lympany always leaned toward faster tempos generally, but she adhered more to Chopin's markings as far as tempo modifications were concerned. Like if you compare how she times the A-flat Nocturne, Opus 32 No. 2's middle section to Smeterlin kind of rushing through it, you'll hear how Lympany captures much more the music's almost balletic subtext. In fact, this nocturne is featured in the ballet Les Sulfides, which is the ballet based on Chopin piano pieces. I also want to mention Moura Lympany's drop-dead gorgeous chains of trills in the B major Opus 62 No. 1 Nocturne. Now, some of her performances, I have to admit, are a little glib and smoothed over, but I do enjoy this cycle, and I'm happy to pull it down from my shelf every now and then. It was reissued by Dutton on CD many years ago, and you might possibly be able to find that through secondhand dealers. Oh yeah, it was also reissued on the Regis label, coupled with Moura Lympany's Chopin Preludes. That might be easier to source. However, there was a vinyl reissue on the Classics for Pleasure label that contained 10 of the Nocturnes, and you can grab this release for free by going to the amazing Internet Archive website, and I've posted a link in my episode notes, so you at least can sample some of the cycle. However, when we look at the Chopin Nocturne cycles from the 1960s, there's one version that continues to stand out above the others, and that is the cycle by the great Czech pianist Ivan Moravec. It was originally issued on LP in the United States on Connoisseur Society. Nonsuch reissued it on CD back in 1991. And then in 2015, the Superfon label brought out a remastered version that probably has the best sound overall. There was a little less tape hiss than on Nonsuch, and the piano's upper register is slightly brighter and more defined. But honestly, the differences between Nonsuch and Superfon are so minimal that if you already have the Nonsuch edition, you don't have to upgrade it. But what's more important is how Ivan Moravec approaches these works and the way he manages to be both refined and purposeful at the same time. Let's use that B major opus 32 number 1 nocturne again as an example. Now, Moravec is far more dramatic than Smeterlin or Lympany. Think of those intense, almost heart-stopping strettos, those dynamic build-ups that lead into pauses and the melodic line. It's a performance that's dramatic without being vulgar or obvious. Oh, and by the way, the last chord of this B major nocturne is a B minor chord in the Urtext edition. Yet Moravec plays B major instead of B minor, and so did Arthur Rubinstein, incidentally. I think it's a perverse textual decision in any case. But check out how Moravec plays the popular F-sharp major nocturne, opus 15, number 2. In the central section, most pianists emphasize the right hand elaboration to the expense of the left hand, whereas Moravec brings the bass lines to the fore. I think all of his interpretations are intrinsically contrasted, where every note counts for something. I should also mention that Moravec plays the 19 so-called standard nocturnes, but he leaves out the posthumously published C-sharp minor nocturne, which is a youthful composition that I don't find that interesting. Yet so many younger pianists seem to think that this is the perfect encore, and it pops up all the time in concerts. I have no idea why. And the set also does not include that posthumously published nocturne in C minor. But Claudio Arrau's Nocturne Cycle contains all of the pieces in this genre of Chopin. This cycle was recorded for Philips in 1978 in the Amsterdam Concertgebouw, and the sonics capture Arrau's rich and burnished sonority in full splendor, which I think is helped by the Concertgebouw's wonderful acoustics. Arrau always considered the nocturnes to be Chopin's most profound works, and he constantly probes between the lines. His rubato is born out of bel canto traditions in terms of how he inflects phrases and how he resolves cadences. And the effect is very much akin to how Maria Callas approached the big arias in Bellini and Donizetti operas. I vaguely remember that Harris Goldsmith described Arthur Rubinstein's stereo recordings of the nocturnes as complacent and kind of Mendelssohnian. I don't completely agree with that sentiment, by the way. Yet there is not a complacent bone in the body of Claudio Arrau's Chopin nocturnes. He's not out to please you or comfort you. And if Ivan Moravec took the nocturnes from the salon onto the concert stage, then I would say that Claudio Arrau takes the nocturnes from the concert stage and puts them into the opera house. Now, maybe you don't want an imposing operatic diva in the Chopin nocturnes of the Maria Callas or even Jessye Norman class. Maybe you'd prefer the warmth or the lyrical intimacy of a great leader singer like Janet Baker or Ellie Ameling. And if that's what you prefer, then I can recommend the Chopin Nocturne Cycle by the Brazilian pianist Nelson Gurner. I reviewed his Chopin Nocturne Cycle on the Alpha label for ClassicsToday.com years ago, but I hadn't listened to it since then, and I just reconnected with it, and I really like it more and more. His phrasings and accentuations always move over the bar lines, and the rolling left-hand accompaniments always have vibrancy and shape. Now, you may not get the darkness and tragic undertones that others bring to the C-sharp minor, Opus 27, number 1 Nocturne's outer sections, or to that tumultuous central octave passage at the climax of the C minor Nocturne, Opus 48, number 1. But that's, a tiny quibble. There's another more recent Chopin Nocturne Cycle also on Alpha that comes from Bruno Riguto, and I hope I will have the opportunity to discuss that release in a later podcast, especially because Riguto recorded the Nocturnes earlier for EMI, and it might be fun to compare his two cycles. However, one of the most recent Chopin Nocturne Cycles I've heard is unambiguously reference-worthy. And this cycle comes from pianist Stephen Hough. It's on the Hyperion label. And just everything about his playing seems ideal. Stephen Hough applies rubato with the utmost discretion, taste, and proportion, and he underlines Chopin's harmonic felicities by way of the most subtle shifts in tone color and chord balances. And the way that he floats cantabile legato lines often gives the illusion that he's using more sustain pedal than he's actually employing. This is finger legato technique at its most rarefied and masterful. And I've seldom heard the double notes in the G major Nocturne, the Opus 37, number 2, sound so effortless and feathery, for lack of a better word. In my review of this cycle for ClassicsToday.com, I wrote that Stephen Hough struck a perfect balance between intelligence and instinct, and that he projected plenty of imagination without spilling over ever into contrivance. And there are bonus tracks, too. In addition to the 21 Nocturnes, Stephen Hough presents a piece in C-sharp minor of anonymous authorship published in Russia under Chopin's name. And then he gives an additional performance of the E-flat, Opus 9, number 2, that incorporates authentic ornamented textual variants. And Angela Hewitt also played these variants in her Hyperion recording, incidentally. And I'm sure that hardcore piano geeks know about, or maybe you've even heard, that old 78 with Raoul Koshalsky playing this nocturne with authentic variants, or as my late record collector friend Phil Stern used to say, he plays authentic variants. So there we have it, 6 diverse, yet I think equally compelling Chopin Nocturne Cycles for your consideration. The pianists are Jan Smeterlin, Moura Lympany, Ivan Moravec, Claudio Arrau, Nelson Gurner, and Stephen Hough. This is Jed Distler, and I thank you for checking out the Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. Please let your piano-loving friends, colleagues, and family members know about this podcast. And I look forward to you and I being together next time for the next episode. Until then, be well and stay safe.